Cohen, a professor of English here at Beloit, where I also teach journalism courses and chair the college's new media studies major and its journalism program. I mentioned my teaching and administrative duties really just to emphasize how much this year's Weissberg Chair programming has reached across our campus and informed, inspired, and impacted students studying really a wide range of subjects. It's fostered better quality discussions on campus about press freedom, international environmental politics, freedom of speech, and even how members of this community represent themselves online. Members of the English Department, Media Studies, and the Journalism program are very grateful for Joel's generosity with his time and his work with our students this week. And we're especially grateful for the hard work of our colleagues, particularly Beth Doherty, Elizabeth Brewer, and Josh Moore for arranging these events, and especially to the Weissberg Foundation and the Weissberg family for its continuing commitment to our college. The issues highlighted and conversations initiated this week, many of them very difficult, will resonate and inform the lives of our students and our teaching, I think, for years to come. So just please join me for a moment for thanking everyone for this really amazing week of programming. This week's panel is featured Weissberg Week. It's always one of my favorites. This morning's topic, as you know, is value, fact, and truth in the age of fake news. It extends this week's discussion of press freedom to a subject which Joel demonstrated in his talk last night, an issue that's become one of the most pressing topics of our day. I'm happy to welcome back to campus Andy Hall, who's come to Beloit a couple times. He leads the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism. If you haven't read or visited their website, I can promise you've read their stories if you've been reading Wisconsin news over the past several years. Their stories are regularly featured across a range of media. Andy's going to lead this morning's session, so I'm going to hand it over to him.
Good morning. Thank you, Sean, and good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for being here on a gorgeous spring day. As Sean mentioned, the title of the panel is Valuing Fact and Truth in the Age of Fake News. We're going to keep it moving pretty swiftly. Each panelist has, each of the first four panelists will have a presentation lasting 15 to 20 minutes. And then Joel, in a fellow-like manner, is going to wrap up what he's hearing and pose a few questions to guide the conversation. We'll go ahead and get started with, and I'll say briefly the names of the panelists, but they'll tell you a little bit more about their work and their organizations as they get started into their presentations. The panelists are Jeffrey Godfrey from the Pew Research Center, Angie Dobronic, Holon from the PolitiFact, Lori Robertson from Fact Check, and Dee Hall, my wife, the managing editor of the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism. And then, as I mentioned, Joel will wrap things up. Jeffrey is going to start with an overview of what the public thinks about journalism and journalists. We think that's a good way to set the landscape. Then you're going to hear about the fact-checking operations, both external and internal, at various organizations. So take it away, Jeffrey. Always push that button.
I saw a green light. Now we're good? First, thank you all for inviting me here today to talk about some of the research that I've done on journalism and public's perceptions of journalism and how they interpret the news. To give you a little bit of a background of who I am on the journalism research team at the Pew Research Center. And I focus a lot on our public opinion polling on that team. We do a lot of other methodologies as well, but what I'm going to talk about today is some of our public opinion polling. To give you a little bit of a background of who we are at the Pew Research Center, for those of you who aren't familiar, so we are what we call a nonpartisan fact tank. I know a lot of you have heard the term think tank. We call ourselves fact tank because we're providing a lot of facts and data out there. And so we provide a lot of the facts and data around issues, attitudes, and trends that are shaping the world. As I said, we do a lot of public opinion polling, but we do other methodologies as well, including content analysis, demographic research, data-driven social science, But something that is unique about us is that part of our nonpartisanship, we also don't provide policy positions or recommendations. Also, everything that I'm presenting here today is available for you to look at on our website, and also for those of you who have a data mind, a lot of the data is also publicly available on our website as well. As you can see up there, we have a number of different research areas. As I said, I'm part of the journalism team. And please feel free to follow us on Twitter to see all of our updates and all of the new data and facts that are coming out. So what I want to talk to you today about is about how the American public is able to differentiate between what is factual and what is opinion. There's a basic part of internalizing the news, and we're going to sort of look through how well equipped the public is able to do that. But before we get there, I want to talk through sort of the context of why we studied that. What are the current news habits and attitudes in America today? And so one of the most prominent things in today's news media environment and political environment, obviously, are political divides. That's not a shock to you. And this particularly stands out when it comes to people's attitudes towards the news media. So now Democrats and Republicans disagree more than ever on perceptions of the news media's role in society. And these political divides and attitudes towards the news media have widened in the wake of the 2016 presidential election. Specifically, strong divisions emerged around certain things as the support of the news media's watchdog role. And what I mean by that is whether the public thinks that the news media is preventing our political leaders from doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Also on the perceived fairness in political coverage, in Americans' trust in the information that they're getting from national and local news organizations, and also their rating of how well the news media are doing in providing them with the important information. And while some of these differences did exist before the 2016 election, Republicans and Democrats did run a number of these before, these divides are larger than we've ever seen before, and there are historical differences here. A few of these questions we've been asking for decades, and we're seeing divides that we've never seen before. So beyond these attitudes, Republicans and Democrats differ dramatically in how they stay informed. Where are they getting their information from? And the data here speaks to just how large these differences are. After the 2016 election, we asked people to provide us with the main source of news that they were using for information about the election. Trump voters were coalescing around one source, that being Fox News. 4 in 10 Trump voters were telling us that their main source of news about the election was Fox News. Clinton's voters, on the other hand, didn't have this level of coalescing. CNN was named more than any other source for Clinton voters, but it didn't have the dominance that Fox News had on the right. Instead, it was more spread out, so MSNBC and Facebook and local TV news and a bunch of other sources were all named by about 5 to 9%. But more important for the discussion here is there's a little overlap between the sources that were used on the left and the sources that were used on the right. As I said, 40% of Trump voters told us they were using Fox News as their main source for the election. 3% among Clinton voters. 9% of Clinton voters were telling us MSNBC, 1% of Trump voters. And this also was not just for the main source. We asked a series of sources that they were regularly getting their news about. And so we can see again these large political divides in the information sources that people were using. And perhaps we knew some of this already, but the specific sources that people were turning to does have a large impact on the news that they get and the information that they're getting. So we saw this a lot in a study that we did after the 2016 presidential election, and what we wanted to do was look at the first 100 days of the Trump administration. What was the news coverage of Trump and his administration? And we did find out through this study that where Americans turn to can have a very large impact on what people hear about Trump and his administration. So what we did is that we grouped the content of what we were studying based on whether that outlet had a left-leaning audience, whether it had a right-leaning audience, whether it had a more mixed audience. And we saw very clear differences in the content of what was being produced. First, in the types and the ranges of the voices that were being heard and who was being cited. In the assessment, perhaps unsurprisingly, of Trump and his administration, and the degree to which journalists were refuting or correcting something that the president was saying. So thinking specifically about these refutations, we were looking at the extent to which news organizations refuted a statement made by Trump with or without evidence. And we saw that outlets that had a left-leaning audience were 7 times more likely to be refuting a claim by President Trump or his administration than those that had a right-leaning audience. So it just shows how different the information that someone's going to be getting based on where they're turning. It may be about the same topic, but the information that they're getting is going to be different. So beyond these partisan divides, it's really important to understand the more general attitudes towards the media and the sources of information. So overall, few Americans express high levels of trust in the information that they're getting from professional news organizations and their social connections. So for example, 1 in 5 Americans have a lot of trust in information that they're getting from national news organizations, but overall, the majority of Americans have at least some trust in national news organizations and the information that they're getting there. But social media continues to garner little trust as a source of information for Americans generally and members of both parties. But that doesn't mean that Americans aren't getting news there. About 2/3 of Americans are still getting news from a venue that they don't have much trust in. And there's a lot of nuance to understanding this level of trust, how the public evaluates trust of the information sources. So a key aspect in understanding the nuance is the perception of accuracy in information sources. So in today's tense political climate, national news organizations have become part of the political dialogue, and so have their missteps. And so while minorities of Americans express high levels of trust in national news organizations more generally, overall, they think that the information that they're going to be getting from national news organizations will be accurate, and majorities of both parties. But at the same time, most also lack the confidence that the news organizations are willing to admit when they make mistakes. So there is a lot of nuance to understanding this question of trust. It's not just a general concept. And of course, fake news is part of this discussion. And so in December 2016, really when the idea of fake news was really heating up, we asked a question specifically about made-up news. So we use the term made-up news specifically to talk about, because fake news is not, as discussed, is not just one thing. So we were specifically talking about 100% completely made-up news here. So most Americans suspect that made-up news is having a negative impact on the public. The vast majority saying that it's creating a lot of confusion about the basic facts of current events. 2/3 of Americans said this. And there's very few demographic differences here. High levels of concerns across demographic groups and across political identification. So who should be correcting these inaccuracies generally? So overall, there's broad support among the public that, and from both sides, that the media should be emphasizing inaccurate statements. And Americans do place a lot of responsibility on the news media itself when it comes to correcting inaccuracies. Vast majorities of registered voters during the 2016 presidential election said that it is the media's responsibility to be fact-checking political candidates and campaigns. But of course, this is easier said than done, as some of us on the panel know. Americans even tell us that the two sides can't even agree on what the basic facts are on major issues and current events. So these media habits and attitudes provide a context for why we wanted to study how Americans actually internalize the news. How do they recognize the news? How do they understand the news? And so many have raised concerns that facts and opinions are becoming increasingly blurred in today's news media environment. In today's fast-paced, complex news environment, news consumers are having to internalize news that often comes down in snippets. often comes to them in forms that provide little context. And so it leads to the question of how well is the public equipped to actually internalize and understand and parse through this news. And so what we studied here is a basic step in the process of anyone who needs to interpret the news, differentiating between what is factual and what is opinion. So how did we actually do this? So in the main portion of the study, we provided respondents with a series of news-related statements. 5 that we determined to be factual statements, 5 that we determined to be opinion statements. And then we asked them simply to categorize it into 1 of 2 categories, whether it was a factual statement, regardless of whether they thought it was accurate or inaccurate, or an opinion statement, regardless of whether they agreed with it or not. So they were to choose this factual category if they thought it could be proved or disproved based on objective evidence, and choose the opinion category if they thought it was based on the values or the beliefs of the journalist and could not be proved or disproved based on objective evidence. And so you can see up here, if you can see that, here's the list of the 5 factual and the 5 opinion statements that were used. So these did not actually come from news stories, we wrote these ourselves, but they are adapted from content that you might see from news articles. The factual statements were drawn from a variety of sources: news organizations, fact-checking organizations, research organizations, government organizations, and they're all accurate. We fact-checked them ourselves. The opinion statements were drawn largely from public opinion polling. So overall, Americans were relatively adept at identifying each of the 5 factual and 5 opinion statements. For each statement, a majority of Americans were correctly able to classify it into each of its respective categories, though, as seen up here, some were more easily classified than others. But when looking across the 5 factual and 5 opinion statements together, the study reveals that even this basic task can present a challenge. Americans, as we saw on the previous slide, Americans aren't completely detached from what is factual and what is not. A majority of Americans here, as we see, could correctly identify at least 3 of the 5 statements in each set. As you can see, roughly about 3/4 on each of the factual and opinion statements could do this. But getting 3 out of 5 correct is a little bit better than random guessing. Far fewer Americans could get all 5 correct, and about 1/4 of Americans got all or most wrong. But perhaps even more revealing in the study is that certain portions of Americans did far better than others in being able to do this task. So who were those people? Those who were more politically aware, those who were more digitally savvy, those who had higher trust in the information that they're getting from national news organizations were all better able to do this task. So for example, as you see up here, those who had high political awareness, 36% of them were able to get all 5 of the factual statements correct, compared to about half that of those who had low political awareness. So these gaps among the population do raise caution. There is a large amount of content that's available, especially in the digital space. People come in and out of news all the time. There's high political divisiveness. So wanting to do this task is perhaps even more important today. Another major part of the study was to understand the role that political identification has in people's ability to differentiate between what is factual and what is opinion. In choosing the statements that we wanted to include in this study, we included those that appeal to the left, and we included those that appeal to the right. So the study aimed to include an equal number of statements that played to the sensitivities of each side, but overall had a balance across the study. Overall, Republicans and Democrats were more likely to classify a factual statement and an opinion statement as factual when that statement appealed to their own side. So, for example, as we can see up here, we have a factual statement. It is President Barack Obama was born in the United States. And that perhaps plays more to the sensitivities of the left. So what we can see there is about 9 in 10 Democrats were correctly classified this one as factual, compared to 63% of Republicans. Now let's look at another statement. Here we have an opinion statement. It says increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour is essential for the health of the U.S. economy. An opinion statement. One that perhaps appeals to the sensitivities of the left again. So here we have almost 4 in 10 Democrats incorrectly classifying this as a factual statement, compared to about half that of Republicans. So one other key demographic that we wanted to look at here was age. So while some would argue that wisdom does come with age, what we see here is that younger Americans were actually better able to classify factual and opinion statements than their elders were. So despite the fact that younger Americans tend to be less politically aware, less trusting in the news media, they still perform better at this task. Not only better overall, but could do this regardless of the ideological appeal of the statements. So it may be well tied that younger Americans, especially millennials, are less likely to strongly identify with either of the political parties or perhaps that they're more digitally savvy, but even when accounting for those variables, this relationship still persisted. So one other aspect of the study that we probe into is if respondents told us that that the statement was factual, then we then followed up and said, is the statement accurate or is the statement inaccurate? If they said it was an opinion, then we followed up and said, is this something you agree with or is this something that you disagree with? And what we saw is that when Americans saw a statement as factual, they overwhelmingly believed it to be true, perhaps unsurprisingly. This is true for both statements that they accurately classified as factual, and also incorrectly identified as factual. Those small portions of the public did classify statements as both factual and inaccurate, that would put up as something that was part of the task. Now, something that perhaps was really interesting to us was that when Americans incorrectly classified a statement as an opinion, they overwhelmingly did so because they disagreed with that statement. So while the main portion of that study examined what the qualities were that influenced people's ability to classify statements, the findings here really shed light on what are the motivations behind why people would choose something to be factual, why someone would choose something to be opinion. And I want to close with one other portion of the study. We asked another series of statements at the end of the survey that we did. And this time, most saw statements that were attributed to one of 3 sources. One of 3 news outlets. One with a left-leaning audience, that being New York Times. One with a right-leaning audience, that being Fox News. And one with a more mixed ideological audience, that being USA Today. We wanted to understand what the impact was on attributing the statements to an individual source, and would that impact how they were interpreting these statements. And what we saw is that overall, attributing the statements to news outlets, they really didn't have much of an impact. It was really limited, except for one case. And that was that Republicans were more likely to correctly identify a statement as factual when it was attributed to Fox News. But that was the only thing that we did see there. So past research has shown clear differences, and some of which we saw earlier in the trust and use of certain outlets. But when it came to actually interpreting the news themselves, we didn't find much in terms of how they interpreted it. So I'm going to stop there. Again, everything here that I presented is available for you to look at on our website, and I'm looking forward to the questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we'll hear from Angie regarding the work of PolitiFact.
Great. Hi, I'm Angie Drobnik-Holin. I'm the editor of PolitiFact. We're a fact-checking news organization. Our primary platform is our website, www.politifact.com. Who in here has been to the PolitiFact website and seen our reports? Okay, a good number of people. We are a fact-checking organization. The vast majority of our stories are fact checks. I'm waiting for him to get my PowerPoint up here. Here we go. Great. Yeah. Okay. So we're a news website. Most of our stories are looking at specific individual statements from a politician, an elected official, an advocacy organization, or really anyone who comes and speaks in the public square. We examine the statements, we write up our reports, and we give a rating as to whether they're true or not. Our mission is to give people the information they need to govern themselves in a democracy. And our core principles are independence, transparency, fairness, thorough reporting, and clear writing. We don't take policy positions. We just are focused on trying to give people the facts. We were started to cover the 2008 election. So our orientation is often towards campaign statements, but we fact check year round, and we fact check the federal government and its legislating. So we started at the Tampa Bay Times newspaper, then it was called the St. Petersburg Times newspaper. It's Florida's largest daily newspaper. Our founder had a personal belief that there needed to be more fact-checking in American journalism. He had covered the 2004 election and felt that there was too much misinformation and unchallenged attacks on the candidates. You may remember, or some of you may not, the 2004 election was George W. Bush versus John Kerry. And that was when the word swift voting came into effect, because John Kerry was attacked for his record in the Vietnam War, and a lot of it revolved around what happened then. And it was, the attacks on Kerry were false. They were not factually accurate. They seemed to have been invented out of whole cloth. But it was a moment when the media kind of looked at itself and felt like it wasn't doing a good enough job of saying what was true and what was not. So in 2008, we started this website. We were going to be devoted entirely to fact-checking. We thought we might just be an election year project, but it proved so popular that it really took off. And this is, 2008 were kind of the early days for newspapers and the internet. I mean, if you look at presidential elections, there was a small internet presence in 2000, a little bit more in 2004. In 2008, we really started seeing the national campaigns cover the campaigns for the internet. And this is why PolitiFact started, because we didn't want to just follow the candidates around on the campaign bus like the other major metro newspapers. We wanted to do something distinctive. As time went on, PolitiFact grew more and more popular, and our home newspaper became more concentrated on local journalism, so our missions were kind of diverging. About a year ago, PolitiFact moved to the Poynter Institute and became a fully nonprofit, independent news website. We still work with the Tampa Bay Times. We have many local news partners so that our reports appear in print. Some of our partners are public radio stations, independent news sites. But we're now a standalone newsroom like ProPublica or some of these other independent news sites. PolitiFact was the first website to win a Pulitzer Prize in 2009 for our coverage of the 2008 election. Our website functions like a database of fact checks. You can sort through like you can look at Donald Trump's page and see everything we've ever fact checked on him. You can, as I mentioned, we have the rating system. It goes from true, mostly true, half true, mostly false, false, and pants on fire. Pants on fire means something is ridiculous and inaccurate. So you can pull up all the true ratings. You can pull up all the pants on fire ratings. We also sort our fact checks by subject, so you can look at all the fact checks on immigration or healthcare or the economy. For the national team, we're approximately 11 journalists. I'm the editor and based in Washington, D.C. About half of our team is based in Florida at the Poynter Institute. And then, as I mentioned, we have these local partners in many states. Here in Wisconsin, we partner with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. We also have partners, the public radio stations in Richmond, Virginia, and Sacramento, California, independent websites like the Vermont Digger in Vermont. And we're looking for new partners all the time. Okay. Our methodology is based around primary evidence. Every fact check is a little bit different, but generally we're looking for documentation, evidence, scientific studies. We talk to independent experts. If we're looking at something that is particularly contentious, we try to find experts who have different outlooks, pro and con. Although a lot of times expertise doesn't fall neatly onto two sides. It usually can be more nuanced and subtle than that. We list all of our sources, and we have a publish corrections process. And we have a long section on our website where we go into great detail about our methodology. These are just some of the highlights. But if you're interested, I do think this is one of the new trends in the media that's really heartening, is that news organizations are publishing how they do their work, why they do their work. One of the most common questions I get at PolitiFact is how we select facts to check. And unfortunately, there's not a very, it's not a scientific process because we don't select a random sample. We select things based on our news judgment and things that we think would make the average person say, I wonder if that were true. Fairness and independence is really important to us, and this is an ongoing challenge because let's say you have two candidates and one of them speaks and makes many factual claims that could be fact-checked, and the other one speaks and really doesn't make many factual claims, sticks to broad statements of value and opinions. You're not going to be able to fact-check those two candidates to the same level. So that's an ongoing challenge. We deal with that challenge by just being extra transparent. We explain in detail how we reach our conclusions. We have definitions for all of our ratings. We go as far as we can in explaining to people why we rated something the way we did, why we fact-checked it the way we did. This is a really interesting process because, of course, in a partisan age, we get a lot of pushback on our ratings, and a lot of times readers are saying we rated it wrong, citing evidence from our own fact check. But we don't want there to ever be a question of how we came to a conclusion. I'm often asked, who fact checks the fact checkers? And my answer to that question is everyone. Because once we publish a report, we put it out on Twitter, we put it on Facebook, it's subject to critique and criticism from the whole web. So we work really hard to make our fact checks as bulletproof as possible. PolitiFact has been around since 2007 now. We think a lot about how to spread our fact-checking work as widely as possible. We've done experiments in public trust. We did a tour of red states about a year and a half ago where we went to cities that overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump to talk about our fact-checking methods. Because one thing, and you won't be surprised after hearing Jeffrey's presentation, one thing that opinion surveys show is that conservative and Republican voters have low levels of trust in the media. So we were working to think, the idea was if we explain our methods, perhaps that may increase trust. And we're continuing that kind of work and that kind of study. I wouldn't say that the answers are definitive, but there are some hopeful signs. We also work with Facebook, fact-checking content on Facebook, mostly hoax content. Facebook has a program where people can flag content if they think it's fabricated or a hoax, and we've been fact-checking with them. Factcheck.org participates in that program as well. PolitiFact has launched a media literacy program for teens. We call it MediaWise, where we're visiting high schoolers trying to talk about teach fact-checking methods and evidence and separating fact from opinion. And we continue to seek local partners throughout the country. Okay, this is my little advertisement. We have a weekly email newsletter that you can sign up for. I write it every week. It's the best of our fact-checking. And we also, now that we're a fully nonprofit, we have an NPR-style membership program where people support us. We call it the Truth Squad. And that's been very helpful. I will tell you, PolitiFact is a nonprofit, but we are self-sustaining. Our 4 sources of revenue are the Truth Squad, the reader contributions. We have online advertising. We have grants from democracy or civic foundations that support that sort of work. All of our grants, we have independence clauses so that they do not determine our fact checks or our ratings. And then finally, we have syndication and partnerships like the Facebook program, where so through those 4 buckets of funding, we managed to be self-sustaining. So that's PolitiFact's story. I did want to talk some about what's next as 2020 approaches. We consider ourselves journalists, so we're always watching and not trying to have opinions, but fact-checking the presidency for these years, I think, gives me experience to make a few observations. And the trends right now, I would say, are somewhat troubling. I'm an optimist, but even my optimism has taken a beating lately on how much we're valuing facts and factual evidence. I think it's clear that we have a president who has had a documented issue with using facts, evidence to support what he says. If you look at Donald Trump's record on our website, approximately 70% of the statements that we choose to fact check have been rated mostly false, or pants on fire. Some of this I attribute to the fact that President Trump does not have a traditional political background. He's never held political office before. He comes from the world of real estate and reality television. So he seems to think that whatever he says, if it sounds right, that is a good enough standard. Which brings me to the second troubling trend I see, which is politics as entertainment. This is something that we already saw it in 2008 I think that you can see clearly elements of this in Barack Obama's campaign, certainly in Sarah Palin's campaigning as vice president. These were campaigns that were very personality-driven, based on likability, whether people identified with the person. I see this trend accelerating more and more, where people are choosing they're choosing who to vote for based on who they like the best, based on who they have good feelings about. As a fact checker, I find that it just seems troubling. Another trend is partisanship as cultural identity. I think people are identifying more, their political identity has become more important to them than their regional life, where people might used to say like, oh, well, I'm a Wisconsinite, or I'm a prominent member of my community. Now they'll say, well, I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Republican, and they see the other team as the enemy. This is really, I think it's really problematic for how we address facts when we put our partisan identity before reality, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then finally, I'm seeing more and more facts as window dressing as to the campaign messaging, where people will just say anything, and if it sounds good, they're not questioned on it. I have an example just from this last week. It was from Cory Booker. If there are any Cory Booker fans, I'm not trying to pick on Cory Booker particularly, but I think this illustrates my point. In an interview with Chris Matthews, he said that farmer suicide rates are as high as they've been since the Great Depression, trying to make a point of that President Trump's tariff policies are really hurting farmers. We said, wow, that's attention-getting. Let's see if that's true. Well, what we found is that there are only 2 years that have any sort of documented statistics for farmer suicides, and they were both quite recently. There are no statistics from the Depression, and we rated this false. There's no way you can know what farmer suicide rates were during the Great Depression, nor this year. And I mean, I never like to try and guess people's intention, but like this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, where somebody says something because it sounds good, and then when you dig into it, there's nothing behind it. I wonder if we're going to be seeing more of that from our elected officials post-Trump. So that's one of the things I'm going to be looking for in the 2020 campaign. So I'll end on that not so cheerful note, and I look forward to taking your questions.
So now we'll hear from Lori. And yes, we will have time for questions at the end, and I'm sure you'll be able to come up with some good ones.
Hi, I'm Lori Robertson. I'm the managing editor of factcheck.org. Like PolitiFact, we do very similar work fact-checking political claims by politicians. Wait for my presentation to get up here. We were founded in 2003. We were founded by Kathleen Hall Jamieson. She's the director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania, and Brooks Jackson, who was a CNN and Wall Street Journal reporter before launching factcheck.org. Brooks really pioneered the ad watch stories on CNN. Now they seem a little old, but he pioneered this idea of fact-checking TV political ads. We are a project of the Annenberg Public Policy Center. We're funded primarily with a grant from the Annenberg Foundation. Since 2010, we've taken individual donations. If you give us more than $1,000, we'll print your name and city and state on our website where we go through all of our funding sources. We don't take money from partisan organizations, unions, or corporations, with an exception. We do get some money from Facebook, like PolitiFact. We're involved in a project with Facebook to try to lessen the spread of viral claims and hoaxes on the social media network. So our mission and goals, we are trying to reduce the level of deception and confusion in US politics. We consider ourselves a consumer advocate. We actually use that phrase on our website for voters. One of the questions we get sometimes from people is, well, you're writing these fact checks and that's not changing politicians' behavior at all, so what good is this doing? We do sometimes change politicians' behavior, but I agree it's rare. But our response is that's not our goal. Our goal is to be there for voters and to provide voters with information that can help them make sense of all these political messages that are coming at them. We monitor TV ads, and that really used to be our big focus, particularly during campaigns. That's really changed over the years as it has been easier and easier with internet and social media for politicians to reach voters in other ways. Also easier for us to now watch speeches that happen all across the country. It used to be more difficult to get some of those things. So we're looking at any form of communication, debates, speeches, Twitter's posts, Facebook posts, press releases, all that kind of thing. We try to apply the best practices of journalism and scholarship. A little bit about our staff. So we started as a one-man operation with Brooks in Washington. We're now 7 professional journalists. We do get some support from the Annenberg Public Policy Center in terms of IT and administrative, and a little bit of graphics help sometimes. And we have an internship program. We created an undergraduate fellowship program. Up to 6 Penn students spend a year with us. They go through kind of a fact-checking boot camp in the summer, and then they spend the academic year working part-time for us. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about our reach. We hear a lot about the spread of fake news, particularly since the 2016 election. You'll hear people say, oh, we're living in a post-fact world and facts don't matter. We don't believe that. One reason we refuse to believe it. The second reason, we're seeing just increasing numbers to our website that we think show people care about this thing, that facts matter and there's a real hunger for the facts. So I have some figures here. In 2016, presidential years are always our more popular year. The page views will spike and then they'll kind of fall off, particularly that off year after the election. So we had 87.5 million page views in 2016. That was 2.5 times what we had in 2012, the last presidential. But even after that, we were seeing higher than normal numbers. So we were double in 2013. Double in 2017 what we were in 2013, the last off election year after a presidential. And this last 2018, the midterm election, we were still 2.5 times what we were in 2014. And then another really interesting statistic, people are spending a lot more time on our page. I mean, a lot more. So the average time is up 264%. 2014 to 2018, so again, comparing those midterm to midterm, the average person was spending 36 seconds on our page in 2014, which is not a lot of time to read our somewhat very complicated stories. And in 2018, they were spending 2 minutes and 12 seconds. I hope they were reading and not, I don't know, falling asleep. So our articles, these figures don't include republishing. So we're a nonprofit and we encourage people to republish our stuff. They can do that for free. USA Today does it regularly, MSN.com, Philadelphia Inquirer, there's a bunch of other news organizations that will publish stuff. So we get millions more page views that way. We also do this weekly project with CNN's Jake Tapper, where he produces online fact-checking video based on our work. So our focus is political communication. Again, we're following federal office holders, so the president is our primary focus, and then Congress. We will look at high-profile gubernatorial races or even state house elections. We've done less than that in the last couple of years. We've just been really busy with federal stuff. We've even looked at state judicial races in past years. We haven't done that lately. And then we write about these bizarre over-the-top claims on the internet. So fake news, right? So fake news is the newish term, but it's not really new. What we used to deal with were viral emails. This is a story that Brooks wrote in 2014, trying to convince people to please stop forwarding this stuff to other people. I don't think that worked very well. And he was very, very blunt. He wrote, "Let me put the matter bluntly. An awful lot of the emailed messages zipping around the internet are lies, and too many are being sent on by gullible, lazy friends who ought to know better. This cyber sickness should stop. All it takes is a little bit of common sense and skepticism, some curiosity, and a few keystrokes. Nailing these lies can even be fun." Which is true. I mean, if you get an email or see something on Facebook that sounds crazy, just Google it and you'll find information, primary source information that will tell you whether or not that's true. So Brooks went through a step-by-step debunking of this email that readers were asking us about that claimed members of Congress don't pay into Social Security and they're covered by a pension system that costs them nothing and pays them their full salary plus cost of living adjustments when they retire. Well, that wasn't true. Members of Congress have paid into Social Security since 1984. The best pension they can possibly get is 80% of their salary. Most get less. They're not eligible for the pension until they're 62 and they're going to serve at least 5 years. So we find both political and viral claims don't like to die. So in 2007, we had to fact check the same thing again when readers asked us about it. At the time, Snopes.com had written about this as well, and they said they had evidence that the email had been circulating since the year 2000. And then in 2015, we did it again. So I think that this repetition probably helps with the persistence of the misinformation, but also, particularly with this type of claim, it really taps into a common belief that members of Congress are getting perks that they don't deserve, which would be opinion, but it's tapping into that belief, and that's why people are, either believing this or at least saying, oh wow, is that true? And this theme with Congress is certainly a bipartisan one. So again, in 2008, we tried to convince people to please stop forwarding this stuff. We tried to have some fun with this article. We encouraged readers to apply a guilty until proven innocent standard with viral emails, which is not something we would normally suggest. But we said, if you get some weird email from your friend, assuming it's false, you'll be right most of the time. Which is still the case. And so now today we're dealing more with memes and claims spread via Facebook, and this is an example of what happens when we fact check a claim on Facebook and say you see it in your news feed, you'll see related articles and our fact check on it. So, this kind of highlights the bad news for the facts, that we find ourselves debunking the same false claims over and over again, including claims from politicians. This is from the Washington Post fact checker. They've been they've been tracking all false and misleading claims that the president has made. I know Glenn Kessler, who heads up the fact checker project at the Washington Post, has referred to this project as an albatross. It's something they started, and it's a tremendous amount of work, but they have to keep going with it, and people do find it valuable. Including, they're chronicling the repeats, which are quite substantial. This is a claim that Trump has made since he was a candidate, claiming that China, the trade deficit with China is $500 billion a year. That's actually the trade deficit with all countries. China, it's still substantial. It's $335 billion with China. But he's repeated this, according to the fact checkers database, 138 times. So we kind of feel like this. We're living in our own Personal Groundhog Day, which was a great movie, and that's an opinion, not a fact. So much so that we launched a feature during the 2016 campaign that we called Groundhog Friday. So every Friday we were really trying to level the playing field here. So we are at a disadvantage as fact checkers. Politicians can repeat the same claim over and over and over and over. Well, how many times can you really write the same story published on your website? I mean, you can't do the same story every day. So this was one effort to try to, make people aware we've fact-checked these claims before. Here's a roundup. Here's a link to our past stories. We did drop Groundhog Friday after the election. It was a campaign project. We may bring it back next time, or maybe not so cute little graphic next time. I don't know. Another challenge we face right now, we get a lot of criticism that our homepage often looks like it's all Trump all the time. Our response is, we don't like it any more than you do, but Trump is the president and is going to be our primary focus. That's just the way it is. It would be irresponsible to ignore the things that he's saying. This is an example of one of our Whoppers pieces. So at the end of every year, we do a Whoppers of whatever the year was. We do the most egregious claims that we found throughout the year. In 2015, we actually named Trump the king of Whoppers. It was the first time that we had singled out one politician in that way in these end-of-the-year pieces. In 2015, we wrote at the time, in the 12 years of factcheck.org's existence, we've never seen his match. He stands out not only for the sheer number of his factually false claims, but also for his brazen refusals to admit error when proven wrong. And he's really dominated these end-of-the-year stories ever since. We don't fact check everything the president says. Another thing about Trump, yes, he's made a lot of false and misleading claims. He also makes a lot of claims, period. The sheer volume of material is more than we're used to from a president, particularly the campaign rallies that we saw during the midterm. I meant to look up how many campaign rallies there were, and I did not. There were a lot, more than we could really keep up with, in addition to trying to cover other races and candidates besides the president, who actually wasn't running, but it kind of felt like it. So one of the things we did, we looked at 7 speeches and then did some theme articles, and it was one of our ways to kind of solve not having to cover every single rally. So we found a lot of the president's claims were centering around 3 main topics: immigration, the economy, and healthcare. And so we did a theme piece that way. Another approach we've taken, we've done more of these stories that I guess you could call them just the facts stories, where we're not fact-checking a particular claim from a particular politician, and we're just listing facts about a certain issue, usually in a Q&A type format. And our thinking behind these stories is that some readers may be turned off or maybe and they instantly form an opinion about a fact check based on who that fact check is about. So they may read, a lot of our stories can be a little formulaic, where it's President Donald Trump said blah, 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 that's false, and then we go into why. And we felt that, particularly with the number of stories we're doing on Trump, and some readers may get to those stories and immediately think, oh, this is going to be ridiculous, or immediately believe whatever we have to say without, reading the article critically. So this is a way to kind of get away from that and just present the facts. It's also a great way to tackle some rather complex issues and give people some digestible bites of information. I will tell you, I was a little disheartened that the illegal immigration statistics story, we did that last summer during the family separation controversy. We had done a lot of immigration stories at the time, and we were getting a lot of reaction, pro and con, or good or bad, from readers, because it was a very controversial and, I guess, emotional issue for people. So while we were doing that, we said, well, let's just do a story where we give people the facts, and then they can draw their own conclusions from that, or take from that what they'd like. So the good news is that story has been one of our most popular stories for months. We actually updated the numbers in it later when we found it was still one of the top read stories on our website. But one reader contacted me. There was a data point that he wanted to see in that story that wasn't there. It turns out it wasn't there because we don't have it. It doesn't exist. But I was a little disheartened because the whole idea behind this story was, we'll just put out the facts, and it's not going to be fact-checking a certain politician. And he wrote asking, well, why didn't you include this information? Are you trying to get me to believe whatever it is you want me to believe? So it's a little disheartening that he can believe whatever he wants to believe. And then just 2020 is shaping up to be a very, very crowded field for fact-checking.
Thank you very much, Lori. Now, Dee will talk about the work at Wisconsin Watch, the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism.
All right, I'll just wait a second till the slide shows up. All right, so I'm the managing editor of the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism. We also are branded as wisconsinwatch.org, which is our website. Would urge all of you to take a look at it. We do have a focus, as you can figure out, on Wisconsin, but we do try to put our stories in a regional, national, global context, if that's appropriate. All right. Who we are, what we do. We were launched in 2009 as an independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan investigative news service that distributes stories for free to the media of Wisconsin and beyond. We collaborate with Wisconsin Public Radio, Wisconsin Public Television, and other nonprofit and for-profit media to produce investigative reports on issues of statewide importance. We are based at the UW-Madison, and we also train current and future generations of investigative journalists. Our mission is to increase the quality, quantity, and understanding of investigative journalism to foster and inform citizenry and strengthen democracy. Our guiding values are protect the vulnerable, expose wrongdoing, and explore solutions. So when we consider which stories that we're going to tackle, we think about those pretty hard. We adopted fact-checking. It was born out of a very painful period early in our life for WCIJ. Two of our first three stories that we produced contained significant factual errors. One was caught before publication, the other was not. We had to correct it. Those mistakes threatened to end our organization, which relies on trust by editors and the public. We now use a system designed by the Center for Public Integrity, founded by one of our board members, Chuck Lewis. It is a very time-intensive process, taking an average of 8 to 12 hours for a typical story, but longer for bigger projects. Our labor trafficking package took 36 hours to fact-check. What do we check? Everything we can think of. We look at names, titles, organization names, locations, ages, findings of reports, data, our own data and other people's data. How we check it. So we have these massive paper fact-checking files, which we'll show you a picture of later. We want everything down on paper. Why? A, I'm an old person and I like things on paper. B, websites change. Links die. We want to have the information that is available when it's available and that we have a permanent record of it. So we look at emails. We look at the organization's own website to make sure we got their name right. We got the names of their officers right, their titles. We will look at maps to figure out if I say it's 20 miles south of Madison, better be close to that. We look at databases that are available, that are reputable. We look at government and university websites and records, government records, research papers, and official statements made by individuals. We fact check every quote, any partial or full quote or paraphrase attributed to a person or group. We look at the transcript provided by the reporter, and if it doesn't quite sound right, we actually go back to the tape and just say, because I've transcribed many, many tapes, you get words wrong sometimes, you mishear them, or you misunderstand their context. That's another issue which we'll get to is about context later. Transcripts are partial transcripts of the recorded interview. It's one way we check these interviews. We look at other media's recorded interviews. We have this great service called Wisconsin Eye in Wisconsin. So if we wanted to find out, well, what did Governor Evers say on February 26th about this? It's probably on Wisconsin Eye, and we can look right back to that and make sure that we have all of his words and his context correct. We look at the source's own writings, and of course depositions or affidavits where people are sworn to tell the truth. We will use those to check various and sundry quotes. Assertions and characterizations. So any assertion made by a source, including in quotes, is checked using the above strategies for accuracy. Why? So as we all know, anybody can say anything, right? And just because somebody said it and it has quote marks around it, doesn't actually mean we're going to run it, especially if it's an assertion that we know is factually incorrect. So we might run that quote, but only for the purpose of then pointing out that it's factually incorrect. Because our goal is to circulate, publish correct information, true information to the best of our ability to figure it out. So that precludes us from including bald assertions that we know for sure are false. And we've run into that, and I've told reporters, we're simply not going to run it. It's not true that most children who go to the mall are snatched by strangers, for example. That wasn't an actual example. But there's clearly things that are factually incorrect. People might be using hyperbole. We don't really traffic in that if we can avoid it. So the context, we strive to make sure that all the facts, quotes, and assertions are presented in the proper context. Not every 100% increase is meaningful, for example. Like if you go from one dog caught by the dog catcher to 2, that's really not very meaningful. But there can be a 1% decrease that can be catastrophic. For example, global warming, temperature change. So the system, there's one of our fact-checking for an upcoming story. Each fact, quote, assertion, and characterization is assigned a number. We then identify a paper document that verifies the information and mark that with the same number. Context is often fact-checked or discussed with the reporter for accuracy and fairness. Sometimes errors found in the fact-checking process require a rewrite or more reporting. So for example, if you have a source saying, most people do this, and then our fact-checking finds that that's actually not really true, we will send the reporter back to say, okay, first of all, you should check that with the person. Why did they say that? And then let's figure out what facts are available to either uphold that or to say that that's really not true. So we check our own data analyses. That's one really tricky piece of fact-checking for us, is making sure that our own data analyses are accurate. This is a graph a very simple graph that we presented based on an analysis of bills that were passed in the legislature over the previous 20 years. We were trying to look at whether my personal observation as a former legislative reporter for the Wisconsin State Journal was accurate, that after Governor Scott Walker took office, that all of a sudden a bunch of bills were just going through the legislature very quickly. And what we found that in fact that was true in his first term, the first 2 years of the legislative session during which he was governor and Republicans controlled both houses, there was a lot of fast tracking. In fact, 1 out of every 4 bills went through in less than 48 days, which is a very, very fast clip. So the graduate student who was working with me on this story, he analyzed 20 years worth of legislative bills, and then we tried to brainstorm, how can we make sure that all of your facts in here are correct? So he literally went back, and it took 3 to 4 days to double check each data point. Now this is obviously, you can't do this with millions of records, but we knew we had thousands of records and we could do that. So after all of this, he discovered a 0.2% difference in one of the year's statistics, and we corrected it. So those are the kind of links we go to make sure our stuff is correct. So there are other ways to check data. For example, back in 2011, when Governor Walker took office and there were all these protests at the Capitol, his spokesperson said, our emails are running 2 to 1 in favor of what the governor's doing. And of course, most of us in the press room thought, are you kidding me? You know, do you hear those people out there? They're screaming, they're yelling, they got their signs. So we did, after a battle, we got 50,000 emails sent to Governor Walker during the 2011 protests, right around the time when the spokesperson, just before when the spokesperson made the assertion. And it was really impossible, we discovered, to review each one of them in a timely way. 50,000 emails. I've read the John Doe investigation emails. Those of you in Wisconsin know what I'm talking about. It really, 50,000 emails just take you weeks and weeks. So we looked at it, we consulted a statistics expert who figured out a formula so we could sample, accurately characterize all the correspondence by using 1,900 randomly sampled emails. So that's another way we wanted to be able to back up our assertions, but do it in a timely way so that the moment was not lost. So there's my office before it got flooded by a pipe bursting. We're actually in another location until our offices get cleaned out. But it's an integral part of our internships and our classroom collaborations. This is our former intern, Abby Becker, who now works for the Capital Times in Madison. We were fact-checking all that day. You could see all the papers scattered everywhere. And here we're talking about a particular point. Don't remember which one, but you know, we do discuss these things like, is this really fair? Often that's is this fair? Is this proportional? What's the quality of your sourcing here? Could we get a better source? So here we have one of our former interns, Mukhtar Ibrahim. He survives his fact check. You can see he's ecstatic. I think that was an 8-hour fact check. He was doing a little happy dance with his stack of papers there. Speaking of stack of papers, this is Bill Leaders, who worked for us for 4 years. He's now the editor of the Progressive. He has had to go through fact checking just like everybody else, like all the student interns, and he kept all of his fact checks. And you can see his cute little doggy down at the bottom there, looking up at Daddy's work. But yes, that's what it looks like when you do a lot of fact checking. So the last thing I'll mention is that we also provide fact checking for the Observatory, which is a fact checking operation at the UW-Madison in the journalism program. And it also is an important training ground for students. You can see that here Gerald Porter, who I fact checked with, on his fact checks, he said the class was everything to me. I came out completely different and more confident, and he really did. He provided some really interesting fact checks, and I think he had really opened his eyes to some issues that he was not aware of when he went through fact checking and realized what the actual facts were behind the stories that he was working on. So that's what we are. I should mention that we, like the other organizations, we do have our own newsletters. You can sign up and get a weekly email from us where we do a roundup of news you might not have heard of that affects Wisconsin, as well as some of our own stories. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Dee. All right, I'd like to ask Joel now to please reflect a bit on what you're hearing and where we might head next.
Sure. Well, first of all, since this is the last time that I'll be speaking in my capacity as the Weissberg Chair, let me just once again extend my thanks to the entire Beloit community and to the Weissberg Foundation for giving me this really extraordinary opportunity to engage with all of you and to learn so much, and it's been very enriching and rewarding. My wife tells me that I like to talk, but honestly, I've been talking all week. I think I've talked enough. I've never talked so much in my life, so I'm going to be brief. I think I've probably talked to like 15 classes and given a lot of the lecture last night, and there have been other opportunities as well. So I will try to be brief. And I will also should say it's a little bit daunting to be on a panel with so many fact checkers, so I don't really try to be careful about what I say. And the last sort of caveat and qualification that I want to make is that I'm really, so the Committee to Protect Journalists, the organization I run, really we work in a different capacity where we're globally oriented and we're focused on a different set of issues. So I really think it's more useful if I sort of put on my journalist hat and really ask just questions as an informed media consumer rather than as the executive director of a press freedom organization. And the first set of things that just occurred to me just listening to Jeffrey's presentation about public attitudes. The first was, this is always a question, I'm sure you get this question and can answer it, but because people always talk about this, but to what extent does actual behavior correlate with expressed attitudes? So people express attitudes about what they want the news to be and what their expectations are, but does their behavior reflect those values that they articulate to you? So that's the first question. I'm just going to go run through a whole bunch of things and we can all take it down. Take it apart. And then the second question is about whether the structure of the media itself inhibits the ability of news consumers to differentiate between fact and fiction. So, if you're, the traditional structure of a newspaper is, there's an editorial page, and you're reading the editorial page, and those are the opinions, and the news section is the news section. But if you're accessing content in a news feed, it's completely disarticulated from any sort of broader context. And if you're watching, television news, Fox News differentiates between news and opinion in their own minds, but the average viewer, I don't think, is able to differentiate. And I would really make the same criticism about almost all the cable networks. In fact, I watched the presentation of the presentation of the Mueller report to the Attorney General, and I would say that Fox played it much more straight than the other networks, which is more factual, a lot more speculation on the other networks. So I think all of them are guilty of this. And then for the fact checkers, something I worry about in the in the press freedom and defense world is, what is the risk that fact checking is perceived as a sort of partisan concern? It's just basically the rearguard action of the fake news media to, and if you see a critique of the media, from Trump supporters as, the media sort of represents elite globalist views, and are you reaching the people, in other words, that were identified in the Pew research as having issues differentiated? Or are you speaking to the same people who are already making a good faith effort to differentiate between fact and fiction, and those views are perhaps reinforced, but not, that you're not reaching the more difficult audience? And I also wonder, two other points, how much of this is really competing against, powerful structural forces? If Facebook, it's wonderful that both of you are collaborating with Facebook to address the problem of inaccurate content circulating on Facebook. But I honestly wonder about whether Facebook is really participating in this exercise in good faith, because their business model doesn't really correlate necessarily to the accuracy of the content, and the same with a lot of the more sensational elements in the news media. Let's face it, the lies sell, and sometimes fact, the truth is expensive. One other. Why don't I leave it there? I think those are the questions that kind of came to me in the course of the presentations, and hopefully that will contribute to getting the discussion going. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Phil. All right. So, would we like to respond to Joel's fairly provocative questions?
Sure, I can start.
Thank you.
So actually I'm going to start with the question about structure. I don't know of a study yet, and I hope there's one out there, that looks at the extent, maybe does a content analysis of the extent to which at least digital outlets are differentiating the type of content they're producing. To what extent are the organizations making it clear to their audiences that this is an opinion piece, this is an analysis piece, this is a in-depth reporting piece, and this is straight fact reporting piece. I don't know of that right now, but clearly there is a differentiation between news organizations that do this and do not do this. And that can provide a structure through which individuals can interpret the news one way or the other. There is a different study, not from the Pew Research Center, I forget what the organization was, that did ask how easily do you think that you know what the type of story it is? Not asking fact opinion, but asking, do you know if something's an analysis piece, do you know if something's an opinion piece or something else? And there were a fair amount of people that did, wholeheartedly say, granted, we don't know how well they're actually doing this or not, or the social desirability, are saying that they, do have difficulty doing this. Clearly there is a difference in text print, in text there is in visual or audio in which you're not necessarily being provided with that, and that clearly can provide a difference in how well people can do this, how people can differentiate between what is factual and what is not. Because as we know, they're not a lot of television, a lot of radio is not going to flat out give an introduction and say, and now this is how I'm talking to you. That's not going to happen. So there are ways that we can cut and dice the data that perhaps can get to this. I don't have a great answer for you right now, but clearly there are places in which some of this differentiation is being done for the audiences and places where it's not. In terms of whether the attitudes and behaviors actually line up, that's a great question, and we always ask ourselves that. And I'm going to speak specifically to a study that we did in the 2016 presidential election, and this was a study that we asked people, how worn out are you with the news during the election? Because we knew that the 2016 election was pretty, there was a lot of going on. And so we knew at the time that most Americans were telling us, well, I'm exhausted with the news. And this is only in the summer of 2016 at that point. This was not even October or November yet. This was the summer and people were worn out. We also wanted to find out why. And, what do you want more of? What do you want less of? To provide a little context of what are the attitudes to draw people towards news, to draw people away from news. People are saying more things. I want less about, all these controversies. I want less about the personal lives. I want more about substance. I want more about, and you sort of say, okay, we can report on those. We can say, okay, this is what the public wants, but do they really? And I think that's a hard question to ask. Is what they're telling us about what they want in the news media really what they want? And that's a little bit harder to grasp in a self-reported way. So it's a very difficult question to ask. Is how would they change the news media? Do they really want that? I don't have a good answer for you, but it's a question we do grapple with a lot.
I think the question of structure is a fascinating one and really important. Especially with cable news, I hear a lot from our audience, people who say, I like the media, I don't like the media. And a lot of times when people talk about the media, if you ask them specifically, like, what are you talking about? They're often talking about cable news, about Fox, CNN, or MSNBC. I think the cable networks have really turned their focus to news as entertainment. You do not see a lot of reporting segments in the prime time of these cable news networks. It's mostly commentary, argument, and I find it a little depressing that they're still ranking #1 on these surveys of where people are getting their news, because I would submit that if you're just watching cable news, you're not being truly informed, because there's just not enough depth, there's not enough factual content. You asked about the risk of fact-checking as a partisan concern, and I think that is absolutely a risk, and it's something that I worry about a lot. I was walking by the streets of Washington, D.C., a very liberal neighborhood, and someone had a little sign in their yard, and it was like a sign of I guess I would say progressive pride. And it said, like, we welcome immigrants, we're against walls, it had all the positions, like, we're here on the left, not on the right. And then the last one was, we're for truth, we're against falsehood. And it made me a little bit sad, because it seems like the partisans themselves want to politicize truth and falsehood. And, on the other hand, like, the other side of this coin is I hear from Trump voters who, like, love the outrageous things he says, because he's putting a stick in the eye of the liberal media. But it's, so I do think that there is a danger of truth being politicized. I think the antidote that we try to practice at PolitiFact is we fact check both sides. So that when someone says, oh, you're liberal, you just pick on Donald Trump, I say, well, what about this false that we just gave to Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or our fact-checking of Barack Obama. Until Donald Trump, Barack Obama was the most fact-checked person on PolitiFact. And I think that when we are independent and we are bringing the scrutiny to both sides, that is something of a defense. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it goes a long way when to be able to point out we're fact-checking both sides. Now, I would say some people just don't want to hear it. There are segments of the political news audience that are not interested in fact-checking because they're really not interested in anything but promoting their team, almost the way you would promote your football team. It's like anything that's good for Trump, they like. Anything that's not good for Trump, they don't like. So, and I think that's a significant segment of the political news audience. I worry a lot about the people who say the news is so negative, I just don't want to hear it anymore. The people who are like, I'm tuning out. And when I talk to some of these people, what I suggest is that they pick a media source that they like. I would suggest one of the major national newspapers and support it, subscribe to it, and read it on a regular basis and be informed that way. I do think that the journalism that has its roots in newspapers is extremely solid, very fact-based. If you have some sensitivity to where the opinion pages are, where the opinion sections are, and look at the news, I think you will be very well informed. The Washington Post is doing some experiments online with labeling to make sure that things are labeled of their opinion. Some of this stuff doesn't work well because like one of their labels is perspective. Well, what does that mean? You know, I mean, I guess it suggests an opinion, but what about analysis? Does that mean? So the labeling, I think we should think more about labeling, but I think that the newspapers tend to be a little too subtle about it. I wish it would just be, I think we do need some bright lines between news reporting and the opinion pieces because online it gets all mixed up. So.
Okay, I'll just add a couple of things to that. I agree, this line between opinion pieces and news stories is something that has become very fuzzy. You know, we get a lot of questions from readers. There's a Andy Borowitz, is that right? Who does satirical stories for The New Yorker. We get a surprising lot of questions from readers saying, can this possibly be true? You know, and we'll respond and say, no, that's a satirical, you know, news story. And then they'll say, oh, okay, thank God, because that didn't sound right. So at least they were skeptical, but, you know, there's a problem there. And I wanted to say something on the risk of fact-checking being viewed as a partisan enterprise. I very much worry about that, particularly now. And like I said, we do get criticism that we fact-check Trump a lot, which again we do. He is the president. You know, I will say we get good responses in general from people. This is a slow process to make people realize that we do fact-check both sides, though, on a one-on-one basis. So, in particular, our director, Eugene Kiley, will take the time to send a very lengthy response to people when we get that type of criticism and say, you know, the president's always going to be our primary focus, and we do fact-check both sides, and here are the stories we've done, and here are these major stories we did on Obama, and you know, sometimes people don't respond to that response, but a lot of times they do. At first, they're surprised we even responded to them. I think they think they're going to send an email and it goes into a black hole, and we are a little overwhelmed and behind on responding to reader emails. But a lot of other people will respond and you know, really change their tune. You know, it was a very angry email, and now the response is, oh, I didn't know you did that. Thank you so much for your response. So I think there is, you know, more of that communication. Does make progress, you know, but just one-on-one emails, that could take us a while, right? And I do think we also get a lot of emails from people who are very much, I think there is this sort of, I don't know if you want to call them people in the middle, I think they're more just sort of they know what their position is, but they're open-minded and they're willing to believe that their side is wrong just as much as they're willing to believe the other side is wrong. We get those emails a lot from people. Those people exist. It's not like people who are open-minded and are willing to see both sides, people who just believe their own beliefs. There, you know, there's a lot of in the middle there. And like Angie was saying, I think there is though some segment of the population that we're just not going to reach. They're just not interested in reading our stories.
Okay, so I just wonder, you know, when you talk about, you looked at the Washington Post 9,000, was it 9,000 false statements? Okay, that's a lot, and I'm wondering if we should just acknowledge that we are being subjected to propaganda, government propaganda. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I feel like it's a concerted effort to make us believe stuff that isn't true. And fact checking's, I think we gotta keep it up. I think it's just, it's like a tiny little arrow being shot against this gigantic machine of false information that's being rained down on our heads.
I mean, how is that different from years past? Is it just the sheer volume?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the sheer volume. Also, it's placed reporters like myself in this weird position of having people straight out lie to you about stuff that is provably false and basically challenging you to just publish that, you know, anyway. And you sort of have to because it's some top person saying it. It's a
President Trump, that he came into office seeking to make the media an enemy of his. Right from the get-go, when he was a candidate, he would point, and I witnessed this myself, I think a lot of people saw it on TV, he would point to the media and say, look at those horrible people. So this antagonistic relationship between the president and the press was something that he wanted and cultivated. And I think at first the media didn't take it seriously. They thought like, oh, this guy who's campaigning, this is a campaign thing, he's probably not gonna win. But he did win, and he was serious, and he's continued that kind of rhetoric into his presidency, and it sets up this really negative dynamic that is difficult for the media to get out of. Because if somebody sits there and says, you're my enemy, you're my enemy, you're my enemy, if you say I'm not, third party, being the American public, I mean, they're going to be like, well, one of them certainly thinks they're enemies, so, you know, what is that relationship?
One of the things that I'm just going to sort of continue in this role and asking provocative questions, but I mean, I wonder if we're engaged in a dialogue with ourselves on these kinds of issues. And even, you know, we really got me thinking about the process of our own fact checking. So I run an organization that's obsessive about facts because we are engaging every day with our adversaries who, you know, are these repressive governments around the world, and we need to make sure that when we go into those meetings, because unlike, you know, most journalists, we're directly engaging with the people who are responsible and in a way that and we seek to change their behavior. But I wonder if the people who are attacking us about in the media around facts are really operating in good faith. And if we obsessively focus on the kinds of facts that are important to us, like whether Madison is 20 miles or 25 miles from city X, are we sort of spinning our wheels and engaging in an exercise which matters deeply to our own constituencies, but doesn't really matter to the people who use the mistakes that we may make to attack and undermine our credibility, but are not really operating in good faith. Do you think of that?
Well, that's certainly the case, but I guess if you fact check stories, you help get rid of some of that ammunition. It just feels like, for example, if you're operating, you know, if you get somebody's name wrong, they wonder what else you got wrong. And so, is that rational? Maybe not. But I know it's human nature, and so we try to do everything we can to show people that We are trying our very, very hardest to get everything as right as we can get it. And are we going to get things wrong? Yes, because we're humans. Sometimes we get wrong information from sources who we believe are credible. That happens, in which case we correct it or explain what happened. I think it is okay to be obsessive about facts. Now, I'm not, with our stories at Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism, we're not fact-checking something else. We're fact-checking ourselves so that what we present to the public is as factually accurate as we can humanly make it, given, it's the best we feel like we can do. For example, tomorrow, I'll be spending my Sunday fact-checking a story we're going to put out next week. It's probably going to be a 12 to 14 hour fact-check. So, we're just trying as hard as we can to make sure the stuff is correct and not give ammunition to people who are either attacking us in good faith or just attacking us because they want to attack us.
Do we have questions from the audience? We still have some time available.
Does this work? Yeah. Hi. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate the whole experience that's happening. I wanted to kind of open up the conversation a bit to something that was mentioned earlier. This is a question to anybody on the panel. It's less about politics and the fake news that we see in politics, but kind of opening it up to media that we see on the internet. So we know that facts are hard, and you guys work with facts that are it's either true or it's not true. But understanding and acceptance of that is kind of up to the person. So my question is about half-truths and what to do about that. So Lori, you mentioned in your presentation there was an article about what to do if your friend sends you an email with a lie in it. So my question is about using, when we see half-truths on the internet, shared by somebody that we know, somebody that we, like a person to person, not like an organization or politics or anything like that. What do you do in that? So we see that there can be half-truths that can lead to radicalization, that sometimes spark violence, sometimes actually have fatal outcomes if some fake news is shared or half-truths are shared. So is slanted news fake news? And when you see that, I know that everybody in this audience can probably have an example of hey, this person shared this article written by somebody, this journalist or writer who's known to be hateful or divisive or something like that. They have very explicit bias, maybe they're xenophobic or something like that. So what do you do when you have one person, and maybe this is in your own personal lives, but what do you do when you see a half-truth being presented, and you don't just want to give them a presentation that hey, you're wrong, close it off, because I feel like that's just going to be more divisive. So how do you understand them?
One thing we do is we look at these fact-checking sites and might send family members a link to that saying, yeah, this part was true, but this part really wasn't true. And so therefore the final conclusion just isn't really true. So we try to do that, usually, mechanically, like private messages or private emails, not broadcasting it. You're stupid, look at this. So it's... I guess we know why. So that's just what I would suggest. And, there's also Snopes, which a lot of people have mentioned. So, just letting them know that, yeah, I know that so-and-so said that, or that this organization reported it, but here's a factual recitation of that. And we've used that, in our personal life with family members or friends who pass on stuff that isn't true.
I just wanted to add, we do a lot of fact checks that it's not, true or false. It's somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of times where a politician uses a figure, say they said it was 10, whatever it was, and it's really 1, right? And that's really easy. But there's a lot of stuff in between that's misleading. They're very nuanced stories that we do, and sometimes they're very difficult stories. I think they're our most important stories, honestly, because the truth isn't always so black and white. It's messy and complex and something in the middle there. We've done a lot of stories where it's true but, I call them, where somebody has taken a statistic that's true, in isolation, but if you look at the context, that changes what this means quite significantly. So yeah, it's not one of, some of those are not something where you can just say, well, that's not true. You're like, well, that's misleading. Here's an article that explains why. And I think those articles can really spark a lot of conversation. But you're right, it's just not so simple as, oh, that's a hoax or that was made up. There's lots of gray areas, I guess, in between.
I love this question because I grapple with it a lot myself when I hear people saying things that, right, like, we fact check that. I know that's not true. And there's a wonderful book that has helped me think through this topic. It's by a social psychologist named Jonathan Haidt, and the book is called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Disagree About Politics and Religion. And he says that when you are dealing with someone who has some factually incorrect views, the best thing, the best hope for correction is in person in a friendly environment. So like over dinner, and instead of being like, oh, that's totally wrong, you need a soft approach like, oh, well, I heard something different from over here, that it suggested maybe this. Do you think it could be that? and that if you have this soft approach, it's more helpful. He said that arguing with people you don't know online is pointless. Like, you're never going to convince anybody of anything. So that's that. I try to remember that advice. I do think very gentle correction is better than something harsh. And for things that are half true, I think it just depends on the context, because there are certainly there's certainly issues that are very complicated and not clear-cut. I think people mix up fact and opinion quite a bit. And there's also a disturbing trend, I think, in American politics where instead of engaging with the argument, people try to discredit the messenger. I would try to deal with the arguments it just seems more intellectually fair than to be like, oh, well, you shouldn't listen to that because that person is horrible, or that kind of thing.
One little thing I would add is a great question. I'm sure we all know this in one way or another in our personal lives, if not professional. There's some research indicating that graphics can be more persuasive than text sometimes. That if you can show somebody a chart or some other graphic dealing with the issue, sometimes that's been shown to be more persuasive in changing people's minds than simple text and argument. So sometimes we try to find a graphic. We have more questions.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. This question is for Jeffrey at Pew. Can you talk a bit about your methodology for collecting the data and how you ensure random or fair sample, and then also the instruments you use to get that data?
So most of the data here that we did was from public opinion surveys, all of which were conducted online. And so at the Pew Research Center, we have something called the American Trends Panel, in which we currently have a panel of over, right now, I think it's at 10,000 people right now, because we just got into recruitment. And many of those people were recruited from random digit dialing phone surveys at the beginning of it, and then it went on to something called an address-based sample, where you randomly get people to join your panel, so that you get very close to having a representative panel that you can pull from to be representative of the U.S. For the fact opinion survey, that was a questionnaire as well, and that was conducted using another vendor's panel, and people are selected from that panel to be representative of the U.S., and then there are statistical weights that are put on top of that so that we make sure that we, in the end, do have a representative sample of the United States. Now, in terms of the randomization, do you mean randomization in order to ensure generalizability, or in terms of the statements? So I can talk about that. Okay, so in terms of the randomization, phone random digit dialing, it's a long process. I'm not going to get into it, but people are dialing so that they can then be ensure that the sample in the end does look representative. That's for phone surveys, but again, for the American Trans panel, that was a big part of how we got the panel at the beginning. In terms of the randomization for these statements, so for the main part of that study, everyone got all statements. So there was no randomization that occurred at the beginning. Everyone saw everything and they gave us the information, their classification based on that. There was a second piece to it that I briefly mentioned at the very end, in which I said that people got the statements randomly attributed to one of three news outlets, or to, there was also a condition that didn't have anything, so that you could sort of see what the comparison was against people who didn't have anything attributed to them. And so what we did at that point was, we actually did a complicated randomization, I won't get too far into that, is that we had each statement randomly assigned to one of the three, outlets. And we also, underlying that, made sure that they didn't get, it was split up, so, because there was 8 statements altogether in that series, so that they got 3 from one outlet, 3 from another outlet, and 2 from another outlet. It was completely randomized in there so that they would get a mix of that. And the reason why we did it at that point was for 2 reasons. One, we don't want to overwhelm people with one outlet, but also in venues such as social media, you're not continually getting posts from one outlet unless you're only following one outlet. You're getting a mix of content in your feed from a bunch of different outlets, so that's why we sort of set it up that way.
Joel, I wanted to pick up on a conversation that we just barely started after your wonderful Rotary presentation. I know it was wonderful because many members, or several members I see from Rotary here, so you sparked that. And that was the delineation between the commitment to a free press, which I know is a large part of your work, commitment to a free press, but then also how people act within that environment, and which is a lot of what we're talking about here. So how are we doing on a commitment to a free press as a ground rule that everyone's working around? And then also sort of a longer term, which is, are we worried that we're getting away from where we were, or are we kind of coming back to the rowdy journalism of the 19th century, maybe before the 1950s kind of consensus on an objective journalism? Are we kind of coming back to that, or is it something new?
So yeah, on the first point, I still think that one of Trump's campaign promises was to make it easier to sue media companies. Make it easier to sue. That has not worked out so well for him because we still have the First Amendment, and there is a First Amendment. There is a consensus around this point, so he hasn't made any headway on that front. So the legal environment, the fundamental legal environment in this country is more or less intact. Obviously we have a global mandate around the world. It's a very different matter. There are emergent legal threats to the media in this country. I think particularly around protections for confidential sources and this aggressive leak investigations that began under the Obama administration and continued into the Trump administration and have ensnared a journalist. And that remains a significant concern for us. In terms of how are we doing, I don't think we're doing so well. I mean, just because you have a environment in which the fundamental legal framework that allows journalists to operate, remains intact. The environment is not conducive to the exercise of the traditional role of journalism. Its watchdog role. It's because of some of the structural things that we've discussed on this panel. It's also, frankly, I think because of the polarization and within our society that's reflected in the media, and I think that Trump's heightened anti-media rhetoric contributes in a significant way. So are we going back to the it's called the pre-war kind of understanding of the media, so where you had media that was much more aligned with particular political ideologies or business interests or what have you, was highly partisan. And during sort of the post-war era, you saw media where objectivity was a strategy to maximize audience, and now that audience is fragmented, so there's much less pressure to from a market in terms of your market, the marketability of your media product for you to be objective. And I would say to a certain extent that may be true, and maybe it's just this historical pendulum, but there's one very, very important difference that we have to recognize, and that's the technology. So you mix a more partisan, more polarized, more fragmented media with the technology that undergirds our whole information ecosystem, and you have partisanship on steroids, and you have the lies just flying through the media ecosystem faster than anyone would respond. So I think to a certain extent it may be a pendulum swinging back, but I think the fundamental difference is the way that technology amplifies and magnifies those challenges that we confront today.
I have a question about the media's responsibility for reporting poll research regarding the elections. We had a governor's election this past fall, and I felt that the research or the poll that was printed in the paper, the responses, was not accurate. I actually went to the poll questions and found that they were rather slanted, you might say. But I felt that the media was very irresponsible in reporting those poll results based on the actual questions that were asked. And I don't know if media looks at those questions before they report the poll responses.
Was that the Marquette Law School poll?
Yes.
Do you remember the question?
I don't offhand, but it just appeared that it was slanted toward a particular candidate.
Yeah, and that's something that I know that they do look at, and they've got a good reputation for being relatively accurate. And that is something that reporters look at too, because you want to know, okay, what was the yes answer? What was the question? If 50% of people said yes, what were they answering?
I also felt that the sample was very small for them to give the results that they did.
Well, sometimes, and sometimes you can do a relatively small sample. I think for the state of Wisconsin, it's, I want to say 500, but it might be less than that. So that's another thing that has been done. There are some methods behind that the public doesn't really see about how they come up with that small group. Andy's actually more of an expert on polls than I am.
But yeah, I commend you for looking at the question wording, and that's exactly what journalists should do when they're covering a poll, as well as look at the sample size, as well as look at the margin for error. They should explain the margin for error in every story, and of course look at the methodology to make sure that the sample of respondents wasn't representative, or was representative of the likely voting population. All of those things need to be considered every time. I think our reliance, I mean journalists' reliance on polls, probably has grown as we've seen newsroom staffing levels decline. Polls could be quick and easy for journalists to jump onto, as opposed to going out and doing a deep dive into issues and looking at the race and the money and politics angles. All I can say, I guess, is journalists need, given the magnitude of how polls are used by all parties, journalists have a responsibility to handle those things really well, and we need to have a lot of training for journalists to make sure that they do that, and then members of the public also have the responsibility to do what you did and look at those questions and raise questions if you're not comfortable with them.
I know at PolitiFact we're doing fewer fact checks that rely on public polling because there's so many questions right now whether polling methodology is always sound. And the main there seem to be two main problems. Number one, people have moved away from landlines, so it's made it more difficult for pollsters to reach them. But the other is that the public seems to have more reluctance to answer polls. They don't want to answer them. They don't want to engage with the pollsters. So we used to do a lot of fact checks because candidates like to say things like 80% of the public supports my position on X. And we used to fact check that by looking at the polls and saying, is that so? We're steering away from those fact checks because we just don't have confidence that the polling results we're just not sure if they're valid or not. And the polling problem is extremely acute on the state level. When we're talking about governor's races, especially, the polling results I've seen in the past couple of cycles, they're not proving out. I mean, and part of it is because the results are within the margin of error. So like a poll will have a 4% margin of error, and they'll have one candidate leading by 4%, and then that candidate loses on election day. Well, within the framework, the poll was right. It was 4% in the margin of error. But I don't think any of us find that answer very satisfying when the candidate that a poll said would win actually ended up losing.
There's a gentleman in the back.
Can I just chime in for 1 second? As one of the people who actually does a lot of the polling, I'm on the political side of it, but I do a lot of journalism polling. But I recommend that whoever's interested to go look at some of the research that's been done by the American Association of Public Opinion Research to look at the variability in the types of polling that's been done out there. Because if you there's a white paper, I believe, that was done about the 2016 election, and I know that's where a lot of the angst is actually coming from, is why did a lot of the polls tell us that Donald Trump would not win, when in fact that's the case. And so there is a white paper out there that I recommend everyone seeing, because a lot of the polling that was actually done at the national level was actually quite accurate. And so when you look at that margin that was done at that national vote, granted we don't vote at a national vote, that's not the way that our political system works. And then it does come down to what Andrew was saying about some of this political polling that was problematic was at that state level. And there is a huge variability in the quality of the state level polls. So I commend you for actually looking at that, because that's what an informed reader should actually be doing, looking at, what is the question, what is the margin of error? And to come back a little bit to the sample size question is that, again, you don't need a giant sample size for a lot of these polls to come out accurate. 500 people in some cases can be plenty of people. You don't need 5,000 people for probably any poll. So that's something just to keep in mind as you go through that. But I recommend that you do go through some of the research that has been done by APOR.
I know, right, the gentleman in the back here has had his hand up a few times.
Okay, first of all, Weissberg chair has been in several classes I've been in, so I'll answer his question. I'm Bob Norris in the class of 1966, and I was a chemistry major. So I enjoyed being in the classes where you were presenting. I'm at the risk of being the heretic here again. I wanted to point out, I do a lot of immigration work. And when we try to convince state legislators and law enforcement, the most effective thing we do is we bring in the mother whose husband's been deported with her children and tell the story how this has changed and how the kids are upset, how they're having trouble with school about it. So, yeah, facts are important, but in that context, it's the stories that have the impact. We've had our county sheriff to my house many times with undocumented families, and after he left, changes happened in his jails and some of the other jails. For instance, one day when a family was at my house, I meet with them, tell them the stories, big old sheriff's eyes are starting to tear up, and the next week he quit collecting country birth information. So the facts, while important, would not have had that outcome.
I think you're describing the secret sauce of journalism right there. We combine stories of real people and their real experiences with facts. And that is how you have the most impact. You can put up a graphic, and I think it is persuasive on the facts, but then you can actually engage people on a personal level just by telling people's stories. So that's actually what we do, is bring the personal stories to bear in the proper context with the facts that we know.
All right, I think we got time for one more question, if there is one.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really interested to know if there are ever any collaborations between the fact-checking organizations. Like would one fact-checking organization ever cite another one or say oh, this fact check has already been done, or do you always feel that you need to do your own fact check? And then if there is some collaboration, would you ever plan okay, this organization is gonna fact check this speech and we'll fact check this speech? Or do you really feel that your fact-checking organization, is the authority? Thank you.
I guess we're supposed to be competitors, but honestly, I don't see it that way. Hopefully, Angie will say the same thing. But we think the more fact-checking, the better. We encourage people to do that, so we don't feel like we have some kind of proprietary hold on the facts. We cite PolitiFact all the time. We will do our own fact check of it. I mean, I think that all news organizations should do that. It's not that we don't trust them, but we're going to look into it ourselves as well. But I can't tell you how many times in a story we say, as our fact-checking colleagues at PolitiFact said, and the same thing for the Washington Post. And we do a little bit of work together. We could probably do more, honestly. There's an International Fact-Checking Day. And we and other fact-checking organizations have done sort of a coordinated effort to put the same types of stories. We did trade last year, so everybody was doing some kind of story on trade on the same day.
We are, if we're competitors, we're very friendly competitors. But I do think that there is value for all of us fact-checking independently, especially PolitiFact, factcheck.org, and the Washington Post. During a presidential campaign, when a campaign comes out with a new ad and we all fact-check it independently and we all say that it's wrong, I think people find that very valuable. And I know the political reporters who are writing stories like to be able to say, all the main fact-checking organizations have said this is wrong. So there is value to us working independently. We do collaborate through the International Fact-Checking Network. That is a group that PolitiFact's founder, Bill Adair, ended up putting together. And we have an annual conference and we talk about fact-checking. We have the International Fact-Checking Day, which is April 2nd, the day after April Fools, where and sometimes we collaborate on international issues, like we fact-check the G20, we fact-check climate change, we pick themes to fact-check around. So we do try to collaborate to the extent that we can, and we probably could do more.
All right, well, we are out of time. I want to thank the Weissberg program for bringing us all together today. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Joel, Dee. Thanks to all of you for spending this time with us. Have a good day.